Okay, so we'll just wait for people to hop in. Yeah, just kind of wait for some people to hop in and join me for the live show. Welcome to Saturday, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. Yeah, it's been a time. It has been a time. Glad to be back home, but I do miss being in Los Angeles. Truthfully, I had a really good time in LA. So kind of miss being there, but spent way too much money when I was over there as well. So yeah, anyway, today we have got the NK Jemisin live show for this month, which is going over the second book in the Dreamblood duology, which is The Shadowed Sun. So if you have not read the first book in the Dreamblood duology, which was basically The Killing Moon. If you have not read The Killing Moon, make sure to read this, come back to this live show after you've read it, and have read, obviously, The Shadowed Sun, because we're going to be basically talking about some spoilers involving The Killing Moon and The Shadowed Sun, more specifically The Shadowed Sun, really, today, but make sure to have read both of those books because it's going to be super important since we're going to be talking some spoilers about everything within that. So, exciting. Otherwise, hope you guys are doing great. Hope you guys are doing at least good, if not great. And we also will be going over the book for this month, November, which is going to be the first book in the Great Cities duology, which we are getting to the very end of the NK Jemisin read-along, which is absolutely bonkers. I cannot believe we have nearly read everything of NK Jemisin's. That is astounding to me. I am shocked beyond belief because I can't believe it's already November. Like, what happened to this year? It like seriously flew by like crazy. And I can't believe it. I really can't. So, anyway, when you guys come in, let me know what you guys thought of the book. If you finished it, I will say that I am almost done with it. I didn't quite finish it today. My last couple weeks have been really crazy with having been in LA and then trying to catch up with everything going on this week. This past week, it's been a bit of a challenge. I've had a lot of things that I have been in the works of. I've had a lot of things that I've been starting up this past week that have really taken up a lot of time, which has been leading me to not reading as much because I'm just trying to get back in the swing of things. I got back into town on Monday. Tuesday, I had a lot of stuff going on. Wednesday, I had a lot of stuff going on. Thursday, I didn't have a lot of stuff going on, but I did at the same time. And then yesterday was also crazy. And today was also crazy. So tomorrow is hopefully going to be a day where I can actually get caught up with everything. And then starting off Monday, a little bit better than the last several days have been. It has just been nonstop chaos for the last 5 days, and I'm ready for it to be done. I'm ready for it to be done. I don't think it's going to stop necessarily anytime soon, but I would like for the chaos to at least come down a couple notches. You know what I mean? So anyway, what we're going to get into is, like I said, The Shadowed Sun. So if you join me at any point as I'm talking through this, let me know how you did with the book, what you're thinking, all that stuff. But basically, what we start off with is this book takes place 10 years after the events of The Killing Moon. So this is more so a companion novel. Again, most of the books that N.K. Jemisin writes that are a part of a series are in some way a companion novel to the rest of the books. The exception, I think, to that being more so the Broken Earth trilogy. The Broken Earth trilogy was more of an actual like series where it was following pretty much the same characters for the most part from beginning to end. But the 100,000 Kingdoms series and this series also has been more companion-based novels where each book takes place at a different point in time. Basically, what we learn at the very end of The Killing Moon is that the royalty that is involved in this world has been corrupted, and you see that basically they have been exposed as monsters and they're expelled from Guharej, which is the main area, very much inspired by ancient Egyptian mythology, folk tales, all that stuff. And basically what happened is that the priesthood that's involved in this world that found out about the monsters involved in the royalty, they basically the phrase kind of like lacerating a cancer of sorts comes to mind. They basically cut out, they expelled, they got rid of the nasty parts of what was going on in this world where, you know, people were dying left, right, and center. Things were going wrong. The government was seeming to be corrupt. So the priesthood basically got rid of all of that. And then what happened is that the city of Guharej also then got overtaken by the Kuzati, who are a different group that are more forceful. They're cruel. They're basically like a neighboring nation. And essentially, this, though, causes a lot of unrest in this city where Guharej was known for its peace. It was a city known where essentially peace was the only option. The only thing that people were able to have was peace. And so those that basically threatened that were then killed off in this world. They were basically like eradicated so that the world could stay in a peaceful mindset. But when the Kizuwati basically come over and fuck shit up, basically, it causes a lot of unrest. A lot of rebellion starts to come around. But then what happens in this book we see is that a plague starts to happen where it's killing people in their sleep, and their deaths are not peaceful. It's not like they just fall asleep and they die. It is like they die and it's very violent. And so what happens is you have a lot of things happening in this world that like is essentially brimming under the surface. You have three characters that you follow who are Hanani, who is basically a priestess who is the first woman allowed into the healing priesthood. You have Wanahoman, who is essentially the exiled oldest son of the former prince. So he is like, you know, he's involved in the royalty that used to be in this world, but is no longer a part of it, kind of thing. And then you have Tianet, who is the daughter of a very, very ruthless and ambitious merchant. So these three characters are basically who we follow. And there's a lot of stuff to unpack in this book. I will say that I feel like I got a little lost at times, but some of the main themes that I got, even especially since I didn't finish it 100%, is like a lot of it is about sexuality. There's a lot of stuff in here that's also about like, you know, how far is somebody willing to go to achieve a lasting peace, which I think we touch on a lot in The Killing Moon. You know, what exactly is necessary to achieve a greater good kind of thing. And it's one of those things where like, what do you kind of like, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, how far is somebody willing to go? How far is a kingdom willing to go to achieve this utopia society? And I think the last time when we were doing The Killing Moon, we talked a lot about this idea of what exactly this utopia is and how N.K. Jemisin in a lot of her novels focuses on this idea of the utopia and the different facets of it. Now, in particular, this one is really, you know, it's a very focused on sex. That's a really big thing that especially like I think is big in this one, because the usage of sex in this one is like you have people who are coercing, you know, each other for sex. It's kind of like a power struggle. And then on top of it, like women in this world, especially like Hanani, for instance, there's an entire scene with Hanani where she is actually being taught about I don't know. I'm trying to think of like how to explain this. Like there's basically a scene where she is in a sense ridiculed for her lack of sexual prowess because she is from a culture where sex is not really looked upon, especially for priestesses. Like in her culture, the priestess is very much like it's a vow of celibacy. And in the Kuzuwati kind of more culture, I think it was the Kuzuwati, they are very sex based. Again, like this is basically like a culture that overtook another type of world. They colonized essentially this entire area, and it just is riddled with corruption, bad things, and it's just a negative place. And so Hanani is kind of like that more innocent character. She's a very innocent force within this, and I think the story really talks about how being in that position is really difficult, and how sex can be used as a powerful force. It can be thrust upon especially a woman, and how very easily that kind of innocence can be destroyed, especially through something like sex. And when it's especially taken by force. So let me think. There's something else I wanted to talk about. So with sex, there's different things that happen, I think, especially in a society where it is overtaken, right? Especially in this case, there's a lot of unhealthy things that happen when it comes to the different actions taken against Guharej when it comes to, like, when the Kizawati come in, right? They basically sweep a lot of things under the rug of, like, the destruction. They sweep a lot under the rug in terms of the way in which people are treated and the way in which especially women are treated. And over time that creates, this like mental and emotional scar on people, right? And it is something that doesn't always heal, and that continues over the course. Like that's kind of where generational trauma kind of comes in, where the certain acts that are done in one generation that are very well known but not talked about, in a sense where like they're swept under the rug, that is something that then permeates the generations down the line. Like, you have someone who, for instance, in this scenario is, sexually assaulted, right? And that can create a certain kind of anger that then is continued on over time. And when that anger is not dealt with, when that anger is not taken care of in a way that is healthy, that can then cause all kinds of things down the line. Like there could be anger toward, that is presented towards that person's children, and they learn the unhealthy habits of their parent. And so then that gets, continued on. And that is where a lot of that generational trauma can happen. And I think with that, this kind of really talks about how pain is not just through physical strength. Pain is something that is on an emotional level, a mental level, a spiritual level. And this is something that I think she showcases in several of her books, like not just the Shadowed Sun, but in a lot of her books, pain is something that is incredibly relative. There are different types of pain that we come across, and specifically in this one, it is more about how there is power through not only physical strength, but power through overpowering someone emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, and how even by just enacting a type of physical violence on somebody, how that can affect their mental and emotional stability and their health, and how that can then over time whittle them down even further, which I think is a really interesting thing to look at, because, physical strength by itself can be, one aspect of pain. But like I said, there's things where with physical strength, you can then force that to where it affects somebody even more on a mental level. And that can then cause that person to, for instance, become depressed, create anxiety, create some kind of like traumatic memory, create some kind of trauma to that person that then lasts with them long after the bruises, long after the bones are healed, long after, anything is like healed up. And that is a really scary thing. That's a really scary thing. I mean, those of us that, like myself, have trauma from their past, this is stuff that affects us every single day. Like, I still to this day have things that happen to me, not necessarily physically, but mentally, that I dealt with when I was like in high school and in like middle school, for instance, where that stuff still affects me to this day. And it really, really sucks because it is something that affects my daily life. It affects how I view myself through others' eyes, how I think people view me. It's one of those things where, like, yeah, physical strength is one thing, but the lasting effects that that strength can have on your other faculties, on your other like mental specific faculties, that's a really, really terrifying thing. So, um, another thing though that I feel like I want to talk about is there's this, obviously, like in this book there's this idea of like a revolution, right? And it's kind of brimming under the surface. It's this thing where each of the characters are basically like trying to fight against what is expected in this society that is built up, but still honors the heritage that they have. Um, it's basically about a revolution, really. Like, this entire world was taken over, and some of these characters are trying to then revolutionize what happened. They're trying to redevelop this world and create a new world where it's not necessarily going back to the same that it did before, but it's not going to be the same as it is now at the same time. Like, they're trying to create something that is going to be different. And there's kind of this thing that we've all been thinking about with how things have been in our current society, in our current world, where we keep seeing past mistakes being made. And how our past is basically coming up again and again and again with things like the different genocides, the wars that are going on, the things that are happening. And it just seems to be never ending. And we are all hoping for that time where those things are going to go away. But there's a lot of things, again, generational trauma. There's a lot of things from the past that have to kind of come up to create, in some ways, that new world, which I think this is kind of what that's touching on. Like, N.K. Jemisin really took a big look at how a society's past and the natural way it develops kind of like cause things to kind of fall apart. They cause like this friction, um this kind of like odd end kind of thing. Like, basically, like there's this kind of brimming war. So things can't ever fully stay the same, right? And we don't always go back to exactly how things used to be. But there's always this search for a perfect world. And it's, again, going back to this idea of a utopia. What is a utopia? And how far is somebody willing to go to create that utopia? How far are you as an individual willing to go to create this perfect idea of what it is that you are looking for? What even is considered this perfect idea? And each person's idea of perfection is relative. Like, you might find something different that is perfect from the next person. Beauty, for instance, is in the eye of the beholder, as the phrase goes. And it's just really interesting how I feel like in this series, more so than the 100,000 Kingdoms, more so than the Broken Earth, this is a really big thing. I mean, we saw some of this in both of those series. We saw some of this kind of like coming up as things like progressed, this idea of like creating the utopia, like I said. But I feel like this one in particular hits it a lot harder and a lot more intensely than the rest of them, especially in the Shadowed Sun. I feel like we kind of got some inklings of this in the Killing Moon, with this idea of the utopia and what people were willing to, what people were doing to keep things perfect. But I think that there, to some extent, is this. There's this sense that there's never going to be perfection because everyone is going to find something within any situation, any society, any, group that is not perfect to them, and they want it to be something different because every person has their own opinion. Everyone has their own thoughts of what should be perfect versus not perfect. It's just a very interesting kind of, I think, more delved into idea with this world. But yeah. So, and it's just interesting that like within this, NK doesn't just stick to one side. She really has always, from what we've seen, played in that kind of gray area. And I really appreciate that because there are, I think, a lot of things that are in a gray area. I mean, like we said, perfection is something that is never the same from person to person. It's all relative. So there has to be a gray area. And I really appreciate how you just kind of get that sense. You get that sense that there is no such thing as perfection. There is no such thing as a utopia because of the fact that there is going to be some group, some kind of individual even, who is going to find something wrong with what you are doing that you find to be perfect. It's just a really kind of interesting thing how this is a theme that kind of spans over the entire course of N.K. Jemisin's work. There's something that is so consistent with her writing, and that's that idea of the utopia. That's the idea of the issues with trying to create a utopia of sorts. I mean, we even see in this book, right? We even see that there are people that don't like what the Kizuwati are doing in Guharej. They don't like it. There's people like it just doesn't work for everybody. Like Hanani is a character that is like so uncomfortable with all the things that are going on in this world because there are things that she doesn't know. They are things that she doesn't understand. She was brought up in a certain way that is pretty much, in a lot of ways, the antithesis of what is going on. And so there's a lot of scenes where it's extremely uncomfortable for her to like deal with some people because of the fact that, she's never done things like that. And Wanahoman is one of those characters who is like trying to shield her from a lot of what's going on. And he has to protect her because otherwise she's going to be left to the wolves. And that's not good for her. That's not good for anybody. So yeah, those are kind of like my thoughts on this. I feel like that really, this, like I said, I haven't fully finished it. I'm almost done with the book, but I really liked this one. I feel like I said, got a little lost here and there with some of the things. I feel like I kind of got mixed up with some of the characters sometimes. But this is something that I feel like is pretty consistent with N.K. Jemisin for me personally, is that there are some books that are like absolutely amazing. And then most of the time her books, I'm kind of like, ooh, I kind of know what's going on. I'm pretty sure I know what's going on, but I'm kind of getting lost a little bit here and there. Basically, books that like I would have to like probably reread a second time to figure out what's going on and like really make sure I know what's happening. I think that this is like something that I would like to do again, like reading through NK's work and having the physical copies of the books so that I can go through and annotate them. I think that is what I will do the next time I read anything of N.K. Jemisin is I will go through and annotate the books that she wrote, because I think that I'm going to get more out of them by slowing down, annotating, and really delving into the work more. Because I feel like this series, while I didn't intend it to be this way, I think that there were some things I kind of glossed over, um, without, like I said, intention, without really thinking about it. And when I come in for like the live shows, for instance, I'm kind of like, I pretty much know what's going on in the book, but there's some like fuzzier details. There's some things that like I'm not quite 100% on. So I definitely feel like that in the future, what I would like is to reread more the canon of N.K. Jemisin's work and slow it down and like do like a real slow read of NK's work so that I can take my time and delve more into the world. I know that that's what a lot of people do, especially because her worlds are so complex and her characters are so vast, and especially in some of like the more obscure kinds of work. Obscure in the sense where like it's a little bit more not inaccessible. I don't want to say that. I something where it's more difficult for like it's a more difficult type of fantasy as opposed to like your urban fantasy kind of things. Like it's that very high fantasy, that very complex kind of fantasy. It would be better to really slow down. Very similar to how I feel like some of Brandon Sanderson's work I would, need to do. Like I've said before with some of like the Brandon Sanderson books I've read, I would need to reread them to really take my time with them, really like delve into the story and the complexities of those books. This is very much the same thing. And same with like, any other like super, super high fantasy book. Like this is something where you have to take your time with it. And I feel like that I may have rushed this a little bit for maybe some of us, where trying to read one book a month, especially in the span of like reading it within like a few days kind of thing, is really difficult. So I think in the future, what I would like to do when going back to NK's work is, like I said, doing that more slow approach, doing that more annotative, in detail kind of read of it, because I think I'm going to get more from those books through that. So I don't think I'm going to do that here on YouTube or anything. I think I'm going to do that kind of on my own, especially after we get through NK's work with the 2 books that we're going to read for November and December. But in the future, that's something that maybe I'll start up again here in like January or something like that. I don't really know. I don't know when I'll get back to reading more of NK's work or go back to like rereading stuff, but I would like to be able to do that in the future. So if I do, I mean, I'll talk about it in like wrap ups or something, but don't expect, like a series on it. Don't expect anything like video wise on it, just because I don't feel like I need to do that now that I've, especially because it's going to take me a long time, very likely, to get through each of the books and really like delve into it kind of thing. So anyway, with that, I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to basically go over what our book for next month, this month is, which is going to be The City We Became. It's the first book in the Great Cities series. So let me go ahead and share that. Okay. So it's a really short synopsis here on Goodreads, but it says 5 New Yorkers must come together in order to defend their city. Every city has a soul. Some are as ancient as myths, and others are as new and destructive as children. New York City, she's got 5. But every city also has a dark side. A roiling ancient evil stirs beneath the earth, threatening to destroy the city and her 5 protectors unless they can come together and stop it once and for all. So as you can see, this was published back in 2020. This series is NK's newest series. This is the newest duology that she's come out with. I do not believe she has come out with anything since then, because The City We Became and The World We Make was finished, I want to say 2022 was when The World We Make came out. But basically, from what I have heard of this series, is that there is a little bit of sci-fi-ness thrown in here, just a tiny bit. And this is, again, one of NK's least well-liked series. Like, it's not necessarily not liked, it's just one of the least well-liked. Similar to the Dreamblood duology, it's just not as well-liked as the 100,000 Kingdoms or the Broken Earth trilogy. Um, so this is going to be interesting because this is going to have a little bit of a different feel going into it. It's going to be like fantasy with a little bit of sci-fi. Think something like Octavia E. Butler. If you've read anything of Octavia E. Butler, some of her stories are a little bit fantasy, a little bit sci-fi, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Very much, I think, in that same realm is N.K. Jemisin. And that is something that I'm excited for with this series in particular. I'm excited to see kind of how that comes in. My hope is that with these two books, they're a little bit shorter, at least from what I can tell of my physical copies. And my hope is that with these two, I can take a little bit more time with them and really kind of get more into them than I have been able to with like the Dreamblood duology, for instance, because I feel like I really struggled with that series in particular. And then the 100,000 Kingdoms I did pretty well with. Broken Earth, I kind of did a little bit better with that one. But for some reason, Dreamblood, I just kind of struggled. So my hope is that with the Great Cities series, I can spend a little bit more time with it, spend a little bit more time getting into it and enjoying it a little bit more than I did maybe the Dreamblood duology, which, with that being said, the Shadowed Sun I'm giving kind of more of like a 4-star because I didn't necessarily like dislike it. I just feel like that I did get a little lost here and there, but overall, like, I really like the story. I like the idea of it. I like a lot of the themes that were brought up within it. And I liked the characters for the most part. So definitely, it's not necessarily a favorite. It's not something where I kind of feel like I have a lot of issues with. I just think I need to read it again, which typically a 4-star for me is where, like, especially with NK, I feel comfortable giving majority of her books because of the fact that I just need to like reread it to get the full scope of it. And from what I read though, and what I understood, I really liked it. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But the live show for the next book for The City We Became is going to be the first weekend of December, which is going to be on Saturday, December 2nd, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just like we've done, we try to do the first Saturday. If that changes at all, I'll let you know, because typically within the first couple weekends of December, I have a family Christmas party that usually goes on, but I cannot remember off the top of my head if it is the second or if it is the weekend after. So I'll be sure to let you guys know just in case if that does need to change at all. If it does, we'll just basically switch it to the following weekend, which would be the 9th. But I'll figure that out as we get closer to it, just because I don't know off the top of my head when that family Christmas party is basically. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this. If you're watching the replay, let me know what your thoughts were in the comments. Let me know what you guys rated the book, anything like that. But thank you guys so much for joining me. Again, make sure to join me for the City We Became live show in December, and we'll talk about that, and then talk about the final book that we'll be reading for the N.K. Jemisin read-along, which is going to be The World We Make, which will be really, really interesting. So hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, everyone.